Hi there BookTube, it's Eleanor here, and today I'm giving you an update of my reading quest. I've now completed my first journey, my first character's quest, and that is the Mage. So I'm going to talk to you about the 5 books that I read for this, but before that let me just tell you where I'm at with my stats. So I'm currently on level 3. I have 110 experience points and I have 208 health points. I don't know how that marries up with how everyone else is doing, but I'm really enjoying just sort of adding up the points as I go along. So I'm gonna now tell you about the books that I read. So the first book I picked up was for the prompt, a book set in a different world, and for that I read Down Among the Sticks and Bones by Shauna Maguire, and just like Every Heart a Doorway, I loved this. It broke my 5-star drought. This was definitely another 5-star read. It was such a joy to get back to this world. I don't want to tell you too much because if you haven't read the first book it could have minor spoilers, but within the first book, in Every Heart is a Doorway, 2 of the characters that are more side characters that we meet are Jack and Jill, and in Every Heart a Doorway, if you haven't read it, all the children within the story have come from different worlds. They found their way to these sort of fairy tale worlds, not always nice, and they found their way back and they can't sort of get back to normality. A lot of them want to get back to the worlds that they were at, some of them don't, and they've been sort of gathered together and found by the headmistress of a school, who then takes them in and tries to help them. 2 of the characters we meet in Every Heart a Doorway are Jack and Jill, as I mentioned before, and this is their story. So this comes before Every Heart is a Doorway, and this shows us what happened to Jack and Jill in the world that they found. It tells us about the world and the story for them before we come across the events of Every Heart is a Doorway. It was brilliant. Maguire really manages to evoke these feelings. You can feel like this world is real. She does a wonderful job of giving you a sense of atmosphere, and I just really loved this. I'm in love with this this writing, so I just can't wait for more from this author. So 5 stars, yay! Next I went to pick up a book with a 1-word title, and I just kind of fancied this one, and so I picked it up, and that was Release by Patrick Ness. I've had this out from the library, and so I wanted to get to it, and I was just feeling it calling to me, so I picked it up. I knew a little bit about the basic premise of this story, but it really was an eye-opener for me. Patrick Ness has written this story, which is a mixture of magic and contemporary YA. So in the contemporary side we've got this story going through. We're following a young boy, or a young man, called Adam. He's at that time in his life just before sort of the final year at school. He comes from an extremely religious both family and, as it seems, a religious sort of area, a town or county that he lives in America. His dad is within the church quite a prominent figure in the local community, and is a zealot in terms of how he thinks about things, and he has very outdated views, especially on things like LGBTQIA, and he doesn't know that Adam is gay. We're looking at Adam's life, Adam's family, Adam's relationships with his best friend Angela, and with relationships in general, and I really enjoyed that side of it. I thought it was really good. Some of the real plus points for this book for me were that it talked very openly and very frankly about things like sex and sexual experiences. It talks very much about Adam and his experiences of sex and gay sex, and a lot. It's not graphic, yeah, but it is. I suppose in some ways it's quite graphic, but I think it's really important to have that out there and to have that explored within literature for people to be able to read. And the minus side of this book for me was this sort of magical element that Patrick Ness could try to sort of bring into it. We've got this kind of other side story about this girl who's been murdered, and this sort of veil between the magical world has brought her back in this sort of ghostly, magical, spirity, and she's sort of looking for revenge. And I don't know. Firstly, I don't really know where it fit in the story and its relevancy. I'm sure there is one, but maybe I'm just, you know, not clever enough to sort of see the connections. And I felt like the book was enough without that. So I think that's why I struggled with it. I just didn't feel like it was needed. I felt like it could have been a really good story on its own right, in its own right, without this magical element. So that sort of let it down a little bit for me. But I did really enjoy it, and I whizzed through it, and I would give this one 4 stars. So next I moved on to the prompt, which was a first book in a series, and I initially picked up Etiquette and Espionage by Gail Carriger. I've read Gail Carriger's Parasol Protectorate series and quite enjoyed it. I think they were generally 3 or 4 stars for me. I really enjoyed sort of reading them, and unfortunately this was a real letdown for me. I got 20 or 30 pages in and I just couldn't read it. I had to DNF it. The characters felt stupid and babyish and like they'd been dumbed down for a teenage audience. The characters grated on me. I didn't like the language used and the way they spoke to each other. It felt a bit basic, and I don't know, it just really fell flat, which is such a disappointment because I really wanted to enjoy this, but I didn't. So I had to DNF this. And so I picked another book, which is the first in a series, to fit this category, and that was Passenger by Alexandra Bracken. I was expecting to quite enjoy this. I wasn't sure because I knew there was a sort of ship element to it, and I struggle with books set on boats. And unfortunately this one really just fell flat. So in this story we've got Etta. She's a really talented violinist in present day. She's just about to make her sort of soloist debut, and you know, she's en route to be a professional violinist. She's spent her whole life, you know, aiming for this. This is what she's been going for. She's dedicated time and really had no social life to become this violinist, and then she goes out for her first sort of big performance and she hears this noise halfway through the performance and it puts her off, and she dashes from stage only to end up being pushed through this sort of portal and finding herself in like the 1776 aboard this ship with another girl who's pushed her through. She's become a pawn in this long battle of families that can do travelling between times. I just found this really boring. We'd have really long descriptions of clothing and ships and various things. Oh, it didn't need to be as long as it was. I didn't enjoy it because it just was boring. I didn't believe in the relationships between the characters. I certainly didn't believe in the love interest. It just wasn't for me, and so I ended up giving this one 2 stars. Next was a book containing magic, and I picked up another one a little bit on a whim, and that was All That She Can See by Carrie Hope Fletcher. Now, I quite enjoyed On the Other Side by Carrie Hope Fletcher. I enjoyed the sort of magical realism element she brought to the sort of story with that, and I was expecting a similar experience with this. I was expecting a sort of contemporary story with these slight hints of magical realism, but what I got here was something way better. It starts out in that sort of vein. You're thinking chocolat, you're thinking you know, that story where there's a young girl, she can see people's feelings, she opens a bakery, she cooks feelings into her bakery goods to give to people to make them feel better, and it seems quite light and romantic with that sort of little magical element, and boy does that change about halfway through, where we go really into quite a more urban fantasy, I would say. It becomes much more interesting. There's other people that have similar things. There's a sort of a department for trying to stop this from happening and from people changing other people's feelings. There's conspiracies, there's testing, there's, I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil things, but this became so good. So good, and way different, I feel, to her first book. I feel that this would appeal to a different audience as well as the same audience. I feel like her first book would appeal to both young adults and adults who like that more sort of contemporary story and perhaps are open to having a little bit of like the mystical in there. Whereas this one I feel would really appeal to people that like that YA fantasy with some urban fantasy and a lot more suspension of disbelief. There is less contemporary story here and more magic. So say on the other side was sort of, I don't know, 70% contemporary, 30% magical realism. This one was definitely more of a 70% magic and 30% contemporary, and I really liked it. I really enjoyed this, and it was really close to being a 5 stars for me, but I just lacked something at the end for me, and that sort of an emotional switch that I didn't quite get, so I ended up giving it 4 stars, but I definitely recommend it. I was really pleasantly surprised by this one. And then the final one in my Mage journey, and that was A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J Maas. This is the 3rd book in this trilogy, starting with A Court of Thorns and Roses, 2nd being A Court of Mist and Fury, and then this one. I can't tell you much about it because it really would spoil what came before, but what I can tell you is A Court of Thorns and Roses I disliked. It was a pretty average book. I wasn't going to continue. And then everyone started saying about A Court of Mist and Fury, and there was this massive buzz, and I thought, I'll just give it a go. And I loved it. I loved where it went. It had me hooked. I've had this 3rd quite a while, and I would say that the rating I ended up giving this is possibly as a result of not carrying straight on the series, because it did take me a little while to get back into it, to get to grips again with who the characters were, to remind myself and refresh myself of exactly people's relationships and backstories. But once I got into it, I really started to enjoy it. It was a longer read for me than A Court of Mist and Fury. It took me a lot longer to read, but the last 200 to 300 pages I've whizzed through today. I mean, I really just couldn't put it down. It was heart racing and got me going, and I loved it. And again, this doesn't quite hit the 5-star mark like A Court of Mist and Fury did for me, and whether that is because, like I say, I've left it a while to get back into the story, or whether it's because A Court of Mist and Fury really did turn the series around for me, where A Court of Thorns and Roses hadn't, and I was so shocked by how much I felt and liked that. Maybe that's why that one became a 5-star, but I did really enjoy this conclusion to the story. There's some really good elements in there, some really good shocks that I wasn't expecting, and some really good strong female characters. People are very, very Marmite on this book. I see people that really hate it, people that love it, and people like me that are maybe sort of up and down with it throughout the series. But it was a really strong conclusion to me. It wrapped up how I like my books to wrap up, and I ended up giving it a really strong 4 stars. If I did half stars, it would be more of a 4.5. but a really strong 4 stars nonetheless, and I'm really pleased I read this. I feel like I might now be mentally prepared to go into her Throne of Glass series. We'll see, but I do think that this has proved to me that the Throne of Glass series is one that I'm going to have to read all together, back to back, all in one go, because I think my problem with epic fantasy and fantasy that has got a lot of characters and a lot going on is that in between books I forget what's happened. I remember bits of it, but I can't remember all those little intricate links and people's backstories together, and I find I can't remember, and that makes me struggle when I get to the next book. So I think definitely for me it's better when a whole series is out and I can, you know, bang them out straight after each other. So maybe there'll be some Throne of Glass action before the end of the year. I don't know. It's a commitment. There's quite a few books, but I'm ready for it now. I'm ready. So that's been some really good books, a 5-star read, yay, and you know, a few close to 5-star reads. So yay for the reading quest. And check out my video tomorrow where I tell you the books that are on my TBR for the next stage of the reading quest. I'm really hoping I can get at least 2 quests done, maybe even 3 of the quests done before the end of, I think it's the 13th of September, the 4 weeks finish. So yeah, but I'm enjoying myself so far. Have you read any of these? What are your thoughts? Even if they totally differ to mine, let me know what you think, and I look forward to speaking to you soon. Bye for now, BookTube.